I'm a pie, and I think I'm chasing a monster. Trigger warning. Deals with human trafficking, trauma. My name is Rain. I'm a pie. I've been on the trail of something strange. Some of the things I've found are hard to believe. There might just be monsters, other than human beings, out there. That's scary enough, because humans are still the most monstrous of all. It started with a drugged little girl claiming she was rescued by monsters, and only got weirder from there. I've got several weird stories to share. I'll start with mine, where my whole investigation began. Almost 10 years ago, I was just out of high school. My mom is a music producer, so I got some pretty cool privileges. I was a bit of a punk, still am. I followed a few tours, went to some wild parties, and made some stupid mistakes. Nothing that ruined my life, but you know how we are when we're young. Finally, I decided to go to college for a bit, where I made some friends, Jan and Jose Shelby. They were married with a 2-year-old little girl named Hope, at the time. They helped me get myself together and figure myself out. All the while they juggled parenthood, marriage, and engineering school. They're amazing people. Eventually I dropped out, and put the skills I accrued into becoming an investigator. I wasn't making much, but I was happy. I watched the Shelby's little girl grow up and their family thrive. I solved a doozy of a case, and the police actually acknowledged my work in their official statement. Even though I wasn't making a whole lot of money of my own, with my friends living nearby, I was content. Then, 3 years ago, someone snatched Hope from her parents, right from under their noses. It was at a mall. Poor Jose looked away for a moment to help a stranger, and then Hope had vanished. She was only 8. Police and even the FBI kept the search going, but the trail went cold. I stayed with them often. I watched the life leaving their eyes with every passing week. I walked into their kitchen one morning. Jose had a knife. I was angry, scared, and sad, all at once. But I held it together and just put my hand on his shoulder. Then his wife came in and held him. All of us cried. I made up my mind. I'll find her. I'll do everything I can. I gave up everything. I left my apartment, shut down my business, and for the last 2 years, I gave everything to find a trace of their daughter. It wasn't one single creep that took her. She got nabbed by some kind of network. One that covered their tracks well. Personally, I think they had eyes on the investigation somehow, the way they were able to stay ahead. By mooching off my mom, I was able to cut costs. Meanwhile, if I ever needed advice, my dad offered a unique perspective. He's a former Navy SEAL. He's also a hardcore survivalist who thinks a camping trip is getting airdropped into the wilderness with no supplies other than a Bowie knife. I'm not kidding either. I have a fear of heights because of him. But I digress. When I took it upon myself to find their daughter, my dad helped me set up a small truck as a mobile home, with freaking bulletproof windows. With what money I had, and generous donations from my mom, I became a mobile investigator, living out of a vehicle in various gyms where I showered. I gathered up all the clues and evidence the cops and the FBI were willing to give me, and I went searching. I took odd jobs along the way, and learned to be a more effective pie, but that was all just to support the hunt for hope. I can be pretty persuasive. Some assholes might call being a woman an advantage in this business. Even if you can weasel a few answers from some sick fuck with a push-up bra, it's definitely not worth the constant harassment and all the other fun shit that comes with womanhood. I'm also pretty handy with computers. With these skills, I found my way onto the dark web. The shit I saw. But I'm not here to talk about that. Suffice it to say, I spent 2 years searching, building trust, learning the language, and crossing the country looking for leads. I also started having nightmares from the shit I found. Not all of the info I gathered came from legal sources. I even stooped to seduction and theft at one point. The guy thought I was a prostitute. I played the part. He ended up knocked out and handcuffed to a bed, with his own fuzzy pink cuffs. I made a copy of his phone chip. I didn't even have to take my dress off. I'm not ashamed in the slightest. All that mattered was finding hope, so I wouldn't have to watch my friends fall apart. That guy was in deep. With his contacts, I found some really sick shit. But most importantly, I found an ad. 10 years. Hispanic. Trained. There was a picture. I only recognized her beautiful brown eyes. I passed some anonymous tips to police, and hoped they'd arrest that shit stain. They did, while I chased my lead. A year later, my search took me to a freaking gated community, in the suburbs of Middle America. I'd found an IP address linked to a wealthy doctor named Jared Lesterman. The guy was currently divorced, and he and his lawyers had left his ex-wife with nothing. He was a total scumbag. Coworkers hated him, a few citations for drunk misdemeanors, and 2 accusations of sexual assault. His lawyers helped him avoid all the consequences. Now he was buying people. I couldn't get into the community easily to set up cameras, they had security personnel and everything. I found a hill overlooking the area that gave me a good view of his house. I had my camera with a long-range lens to help me scope things out. On only my second night, well, the situation resolved itself. The good doctor left his house at about 10, and returned at midnight. It was hard to make out from my angle, but there was definitely a young woman with him. She wore a bright red party dress, and she was either drunk, or drugged, judging by how the doctor basically had to carry her inside. Her drunken manner worried the hell out of me. I was getting ready to call local authorities, but I knew I couldn't yet. For all I knew, this was completely consensual, or at least he could claim it was. I kept watching, wrestling with my thoughts, but then I got distracted. Something was emerging from the little copse of trees behind the neighborhood. I thought it was a dog, or maybe a bear at first. Whatever it was pretty big. What the fuck? I muttered to myself. I scrambled to try and photograph the thing, but quick as lightning, it bounded over a fence, and into the backyard of the good doctor, out of sight. Did I just see that? I wondered. What could I do? I kept watching. After a few minutes, all the power to the doctor's house went out. Maybe 15 minutes after that, a policeman arrived. Who called the cops? I wondered. As I watched, the patrolman seemed to hear something, and kicked down the door. Soon, he'd called in a brigade of police cars. I watched in bewilderment as 3 little girls and a man were carried out of the house on stretchers. It grew into a full-on investigation with almost a whole department going through the house. I just sat there wondering what the fuck. I was able to get some public details from the police. Someone called and claimed they'd been kidnapped by Dr. Lesterman and needed immediate assistance. They'd only sent 1 cop to investigate, as it didn't seem credible to them, but he'd found an emaciated young girl crying for help. It turned out she wasn't alone. 2 10-year-old girls were found as well. The oldest was Hope. She was 12. Just like that, the case I spent the last 3 years on, putting myself in all kinds of danger, resolved itself. Jan and Jose's little girl was found. I felt hollow, but overjoyed all at once. The official story is, the doctor kept these girls for over a year, after buying them from some dark web contacts. But he'd still go out to hunt for young women at clubs. This time he'd chosen poorly. The girl he brought home injured him, putting him in a coma, then fled, presumably having no idea that he had underage sex slaves chained up in his basement. But with him in a coma, the girls found their way out and managed to call for help, bringing in the cops. So this woman inadvertently brought down a human trafficker. It's just a coincidence that I'd started watching. That story doesn't work though, and I'll explain why. Once all the details were made public, I read through them carefully. First off, the woman in red.